Well, good morning. It is good to be here. It is sad that the Goffs are not here, but I'm thankful for the opportunity to speak in his place. I would like to start in 1 Corinthians 1. If you're taking notes, this is not the content of the lesson, but a place where I would like to start. In 1 Corinthians 1, chapter 2. In chapter 2, Paul here, he says, "And I, when I came to you," in verse 1, "And I, when I came to you, brothers, did not come proclaiming to you the testimony of God with lofty speech or wisdom, for I decided to know nothing among you except Jesus Christ and Him crucified. And I was with you in weakness and in fear and in much trembling. And my speech and my message were not in plausible words of wisdom, but in demonstration of the Spirit and of power, so that your faith might not rest in the wisdom of men, but in the power of God." And so the reason I wanted to start with this morning is one, because it helps me stay grounded anytime I come up here, to remember the reason why I come up here. And that is not to impress upon you my great eloquence or speech or wisdom, because everybody knows I'm lacking a lot of that. I'm 23 years old. But it is because of the power that is in God's word and His promises and the plan of salvation that He has revealed. And so my goal this morning is to demonstrate of the Spirit and the power of God's word, and particularly the cross that we've spoken about already this morning. If you would turn to Psalm 24. Psalm 24. This is the actual content of the lesson now. Psalm 24. I want to read a couple verses at the end to introduce the topic for today. Psalm 24 and verse 7. David writes, "Lift up your heads, O gates, and be lifted up, O ancient doors, that the King of glory may come in." Who is this King of glory? The Lord, strong and mighty, the Lord mighty in battle. And then in verse 10 again, who is this King of glory? The Lord of hosts. He is the King of glory. And so this morning I want to talk about glory. I want to talk about glory and what it means for God to be the King of glory. I know whenever I was, I guess younger, I'm still young, I would read verses like Isaiah 43:11, where, 48:11, where he writes, "Behold, I have refined you not as silver. I have tried you in the furnace of affliction." And he says, for my own sake I do it. For how should my name be profaned? My glory I will not give to another. And then similarly, in Isaiah 43, he says, he's speaking of the redemption of his people and bringing his people back from captivity. And he says in 43 verse 7, "And everyone who is called by my name, whom I created for my glory, whom I formed and made." I couldn't help but think whenever I read verses like that it just seemed a little bit selfish. And what I learned when I went to FC, took a class where this was spoken about, and I learned just how wrong I was about the glory of God. Because anytime God says that it's for His glory or for His own sake, it's for others, is what we're going to see. And hopefully we'll be able to see that after today. And so like we've talked about in Psalm 24, God is the King of glory. And so I want for us to explore what that means. Glory is one of my favorite themes in the Bible, largely due to that FC class I took, where Dr. Hamilton kind of walked us through it, and it was really cool. But it was over the Gospel of John. This morning I would like to start in 1 Corinthians 15. In 1 Corinthians 15, there are a lot of different ways that the word glory is used in the Bible, and so it can't be reduced down to one specific definition. However, this morning I would like for us to consider one specific sense or use of it, which is splendor. Splendor refers to the visual appearance of an object, and something that is usually grand or magnificent or radiant. Often, bright objects are described as splendors. In 1 Corinthians, in chapter 15, in verse 41, Paul says, "There is one glory of the sun, and another glory of the moon, and another glory of the stars, for star differs from star in glory." And so here, Paul describes the sun, the moon, and the stars as being glorious. They all have their own glory. It's referring to the visual appearance, the radiance of these stars and the moon. As I discussed this sermon with one of the elders back in Kentucky where I did a preaching internship, he conceptualized glory as awesomeness, which I think is a great way to think about God's glory. And so today, as we study the visual appearance of God's glory, we most certainly will see his awesomeness, the awesomeness of our God. And so the main question that I want to ask today as we go throughout this study is, what does the glory of God look like? What does the glory of God look like? And luckily, we don't have to guess, because God has chosen to reveal his glory many times throughout the Bible. One of the pictures we get is in Exodus 24. Exodus 24. Exodus 24, starting in verse 16. It reads, "The glory of the Lord dwelt on Mount Sinai, and the cloud covered it 6 days. And on the 7th day he called out to Moses out of the midst of the cloud. Now the appearance of the glory of the Lord was like a devouring fire on the top of the mountain in the sight of the people of Israel." And so in this passage, whenever God's glory is revealed, the appearance of it is like a devouring fire. When God reveals himself, he is bright and he is powerful. But Exodus isn't done describing God's glory. A few chapters later, in Exodus 33, we're going to get a very different picture, but an equally as awesome picture of God's glory. Exodus 33, starting in verse 12. Exodus 33:12. It reads, "Moses said to the Lord, 'See, you say to me, bring up this people, but you have not let me know whom you will send with me. That you have said, I know you by name, and you have also found favor in my sight. Now therefore, if I have found favor in your sight, please show me now your ways, that I may know you in order to find favor in your sight. Consider too that this nation is your people.'" And then dropping down to verse 17. Verse 17, the Lord said to Moses, "This very thing that you have spoken, I will do, for you have found favor in my sight, and I know you by name." Moses said, "Please show me your glory." And he said, "I will make all my goodness pass before you, and will proclaim before you my name, the Lord. And I will be gracious to whom I will be gracious, and will show mercy on whom I will show mercy." But he said, "You cannot see my face, for man shall not see me and live." And the Lord said, "Behold, there is a place by me where you shall stand on the rock, and while my glory passes by, I will put you in a cleft of the rock, and I will cover you with my hand until I have passed by. Then I will take away my hand, and you shall see my back, but my face shall not be seen." And so there in verse 18, Moses asked God if he could see his glory. And God says that he will. And he says, "I will make all my goodness pass before you and will proclaim my name." And he says, "I will be gracious to whom I will be gracious, and I will show mercy on whom I will show mercy." And so in the previous passage, God's awesomeness was grand. It was great. It was radiant and brilliant. Here, we get a very different picture. It looks different than what we would expect, which I think is at the heart of my misunderstanding of God's glory earlier, is when we hear glory, we expect something different. We expect glory to appear in strength over others. We expect glory to appear in strength over others, but whenever God reveals his glory, its purpose is to lift others up. It is this image of God's glory that we are going to see today, first in Isaiah and then ultimately in John. However, before we go there, take special note of what Moses says at the end there, or what God says at the end there. He says, "Then I will take away my hand, and you shall see my back, but my face shall not be seen." And so whereas Moses is only able to see a partial revelation of God's glory here, unable to see his face, the fullness of God's glory is later going to be revealed in the face of Jesus Christ. And so if you will turn to Isaiah 40. Isaiah 40, he continues this narrative of the revelation of God's glory and of it being revealed to humanity. Isaiah chapter 40. We're going to start in verse 3. And what we're going to see later is this is going to be quoted in John. I'll point that out when we get there. Isaiah 40, verse 3. "A voice cries in the wilderness, 'Prepare the way of the Lord. Make straight in the desert a highway for our God.'" In verse 4, "Every valley shall be lifted up, and every mountain and hill be made low, and the uneven ground shall become level, and the rough places a plain, and the glory of the Lord shall be revealed. And all flesh shall see it together, for the mouth of the Lord has spoken." And so before we move on, note here that this is God himself who is coming down. The voice cries, "Prepare the way for the Lord himself." And then his glory will be revealed. And so in this passage, God himself comes down to his people and is going to rescue them and comfort them. And whenever he arrives, his glory will be revealed. And so here we have a promise of further glory that will be revealed in Isaiah. But again, we ask our question, what will this glory look like? What will this revelation of God's glory look like? And so it is this picture of the further revelation of God's glory that John then picks up on and sees Jesus as the fulfillment of in his gospel, if you want to turn there. John chapter 1. The Gospel of John chapter 1. In John chapter 1, verse 1, it reads, "In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God." And then in verse 14, "And the Word became flesh and dwelt among us, and we have seen his glory, glory as of the only Son from the Father, full of grace and truth." And then in verse 18, "No one has seen God, the only God who is at the Father's side, he has made him known." And so here, what John is writing in a very beautiful way is that Jesus is the only God who has personally come down to rescue his people and to reveal the glory of God in the form of grace and truth. But still, we must ask, what type of salvation, what type of rescue will this be for his people? Will this be a salvation by his great might and power? What does the glory of God look like? In the Gospel of John, we first see the grace and truth of God's glory revealed in the miracles that Jesus performs. John chapter 2, in verse 11, John writes, in John 2:11, "This, the first of his signs, Jesus did at Cana in Galilee and manifested his glory, and his disciples believed in him." However, his miracles were not the full manifestation of God's glory. In the Gospel of John, there will be an hour when God's glory will be fully manifested in Jesus Christ, the hour of the glorification of the Son of Man. In chapter 4, verse 21, in chapter 4, verse 21, Jesus is speaking to the woman of Samaria, and he says, "Woman, believe me, the hour is coming. The hour is coming when neither on this mountain nor in Jerusalem will you worship the Father." In verse 23, "But the hour is coming and is now here when the true worshipers will worship the Father in spirit and truth, and the Father is seeking such people to worship him." And then in chapter 5, verse 30, it says that they were seeking to arrest him, but no one laid a hand on him because his hour had not yet come. It's the same thing in verses 25 and 28. An hour is coming. And then in chapter 8, verse 20, we're told again, no one arrested him because his hour had not yet come. And so we read that several times. But then we get to chapter 12, which is a dramatic transition point in the Gospel of John, where Jesus has just performed his last miracle, the raising of Lazarus from the dead. And then, right after that, Jesus Christ, God himself, again, the King of glory, as we read in Psalm 24, he makes his triumphal entrance to Jerusalem, not on a war horse, but on a young donkey. And if you look at verse 20 of John 12, verse 20, John is going to explain the fulfillment of Isaiah's prophecy. It says, "Now among those who went up to worship at the feast were some Greeks. So these came to Philip, who was from Bethsaida in Galilee, and asked him, 'Sir, we wish to see Jesus.' Philip went and told Andrew. Andrew and Philip went and told Jesus. And Jesus answered them, 'The hour has come for the Son of Man to be glorified.'" And so we've read several times that the hour is not here. An hour is coming, an hour is coming, the hour was not yet. And now these Greeks approach Jesus, and he says, "The hour has come for the Son of Man to be glorified." And here, Jesus is going to answer our question very explicitly. What does the glory of God look like? Go down to verse 27. Verse 27. Jesus says, "Now is my soul troubled. And what shall I say? Father, save me from this hour? But for this purpose I have come to this hour. Father, glorify your name." Then a voice came from heaven, "I have glorified it, and I will glorify it again." The crowd that stood there and heard it said that it had thundered. Others said, "An angel has spoken to him." Jesus answered, "This voice has come for your sake, not mine. Now is the judgment of this world. Now will the ruler of this world be cast out. And I, when I am lifted up from the earth, will draw all people to myself." He said this to show by what kind of death he was going to die. And so finally we get to the hour, again, of the glorification of Jesus, the glorification of God. And what we learn is that this glorification is going to be unlike any kingly glorification that has ever occurred. We learn that the revelation of the glory of God that we have been waiting for is going to be fully revealed through the death of the King of glory. However, this was no mere accident, as we all know. This plan had been set in place for a long time. Look down at verse 37. Verse 37. Though he had done so many signs before them, they still did not believe him, so that the word spoken by the prophet Isaiah might be fulfilled. Lord, who has believed what he heard from us, and to whom has the arm of the Lord been revealed? And then in verse 41, Isaiah said these things because he saw his glory and spoke of him, and spoke of Jesus. And so here we have some Isaiah quotes. Lord, who has believed what he heard from us, and to whom has the arm of the Lord been revealed? Let's go back to Isaiah 40 where we started. Isaiah chapter 40. Because some people try to argue that it wasn't the intention of Jesus to die and that it was an accident. However, what we're going to see is that this was part of the plan all along. And it was laid out very, very clearly. Isaiah 40, we read verses 3 through 5, and we read in verse 5 that the glory of the Lord shall be revealed. Then down in verse 9, Isaiah continues, Go on up to a high mountain, O Zion, herald of good news. Lift up your voice with strength, O Jerusalem, herald of good news. Lift it up, fear not, and say to the cities of Judah, Behold, your God. Behold, the Lord God comes with might, and his arm rules for him. Behold, his reward is with him, and his recompense before him. Now, up until this point, you might have thought, this doesn't really sound like Jesus. This revelation of God's arm to rule before him, and his reward is with him, and his recompense is before him. However, the arm of the Lord, just like God's glory doesn't look like we expect it to, the arm of the Lord doesn't look like we would expect it to. The arm that he rules with. In verse 11, he continues, He will tend his flock like a shepherd. He will gather the lambs in his arms. He will carry them in his bosom and gently lead those that are with young. Let's go on to Isaiah chapter 53. Probably a chapter that most of us are familiar with. But he picks up this quote, the arm of the Lord, that John used, comes from Isaiah 53. We're going to start in chapter 52, Isaiah 52, the end of it, verse 13. Isaiah 52, verse 13. He says, Behold, my servant shall act wisely. He shall be high and lifted up, and shall be exalted. As many were astonished at you, his appearance was so marred beyond human semblance, and his form beyond that of the children of mankind. So shall he sprinkle many nations. Kings shall shut their mouths because of him, for that which has not been told them they see, and that which they have not heard they understand. In chapter 53, verse 1, Who has believed what he has heard from us? And to whom has the arm of the Lord been revealed? For he grew up before him like a young plant and like a root out of dry ground. He had no form or majesty that we should look at him, and no beauty that we should desire him. He was despised and rejected by men, a man of sorrows and acquainted with grief. Remember the visual element of God's glory that we spoke about earlier. Glory is by definition visually grand and impressive. However, here the arm of the Lord is being revealed as the opposite, the complete opposite. Here we read of the backwards glory that is revealed in the kingship of Jesus Christ. We read in verse 2 that he had no form or majesty that we should look at him, no beauty that we should desire him. And then, of course, we know in the rest of this chapter, Isaiah 53, how Isaiah goes on to describe the suffering and the death of this king. Now let's return back to John. John chapter 18. John chapter 18. We're going to continue reading about the backwards kingship, the backwards glory of Jesus here. Because John still portrays Jesus as a king. We're going to see that in the words of Pilate himself. However, not the kind of king that we would expect. John 18, verse 36. Jesus answered, "My kingdom is not of this world. If my kingdom were of this world, my servants would have been fighting, that I might not be delivered over to the Jews. But my kingdom is not from the world." And then in verse 39, Pilate says to the Jews, "You have a custom that I should release one man for you at the Passover. So, do you want me to release to you the king of the Jews?" And they cried out again, "Not this man, but Barabbas." And so we've read the prophecies in Isaiah of how God will come down to reveal his glory. And John has told us that the hour has come for Jesus Christ, the Son of Man and Son of God, to fully reveal the glory of God. But now we're finally here to the moment of God's glory, where we're going to see it fullest and clearest. In chapter 19, starting in verse 1. "Then Pilate took Jesus and flogged him. And the soldiers twisted together a crown of thorns and put it on his head and arrayed him in a purple robe. They came up to him saying, 'Hail, King of the Jews,' and struck him with their hands. And Pilate went out and said to them, 'See, I am bringing him out to you that you may know that I find no guilt in him.' So Jesus came out wearing the crown of thorns and the purple robe, and Pilate said to them, 'Behold the man.' When the chief priests and the officers saw him, they cried out, 'Crucify him, crucify him.' And Pilate said to them, 'Take him yourselves and crucify him, for I find no guilt in him.'" And then continuing in verse 14. Verse 14. "Now it was the day of the preparation of the Passover, and it was about the 6th hour. He said to the Jews, 'Behold your king.' They cried out, 'Away with him, crucify him.' And Pilate said to them, 'Shall I crucify your king?' And the chief priests answered, 'We have no king but Caesar.' And so he delivered him over to be crucified." And then continuing in verse 17. "And so they took Jesus, and he went out, bearing his own cross, to the place called the Place of a Skull, which in Aramaic is called Golgotha. And there they crucified him, and with 2 others, one on either side, and Jesus between them. And Pilate also wrote an inscription and put it on the cross. It read, 'Jesus of Nazareth, the King of the Jews.'" And so let's answer our question that we asked at the beginning. What does the glory of God look like? The glory of God looks like the King of the universe, again, riding into the city, not on a war horse, but on a young donkey. The glory of God looks like the King of the universe overcoming the world with an army of 12 fishermen. The glory of God looks like the King of the universe walking silently as a lamb to the slaughter while being spat upon, mocked, and beaten by those whom he loved. The glory of God looks like the King of the universe and wearing a crown not made out of gold or jewels, but of thorns. And it looks like the King of the universe being high, lifted up, exalted, and enthroned upon a cross. I want to read from the song Exalted, the first 2 verses. It reads, "Known before the world, seen in future days, glimpsed by righteous men, the Son of God. Sent as David's heir, named an ageless king, granted all the earth, exalted. Seen with blinded eyes, heard by heedless ears, met with wicked hearts, the Son of God. Worshipped with contempt, crowned with blood and thorns, enthroned upon a cross, exalted." Paul in 2 Corinthians 4, he says, "For what we proclaim is not ourselves, but Jesus Christ as Lord. For God, who said, 'Let light shine out of darkness,' has shone in our hearts to give the light of the knowledge of the glory of God in the face of Jesus Christ." And so lastly, as I finish here today, the glory of God did not stop at the cross. The night before Jesus' crucifixion, in John 15, the night before his crucifixion, John 15:8, Jesus said to them, "By this my Father is glorified, that you bear much fruit and so prove to be my disciples. As the Father has loved me, so have I loved you. Abide in my love." And so as Christians today, Jesus says that when we bear fruit, God is glorified. When we abide in the love of Jesus, God is glorified. Fortunately for y'all, I don't have to expand on this part a whole lot because this is what 1 John is all about. This is all about seeing the way that Jesus glorified God and applying Jesus' form of glory to our lives, asking the question, how can we glorify God in the same way? And so I look forward to getting into that study with y'all. He shows us how to glorify God with our lives in the same way that he did, Jesus did. And so today we have seen the glory of God, the glory of the cross, full of grace, full of mercy and love. And so today it is that same glory that others can see in us whenever we commit ourselves to God and commit ourselves to each other in the same way that Jesus committed himself to us. True glory is not riches or power. True glory is not power that pushes others down, widening the gap between our greatness and their greatness. True glory is the power that reaches down a hand of mercy to lift others up. True glory is a life of giving, a life of sacrifice and love. Thank you all for your attention this morning. If you need any help or prayers from the congregation, please come forward as we stand and sing.